What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Comfort Zone Commander podcast, your place for some casual, comfortable Commander conversations. I'm your host, Dan. That's your host, John. John, what are we talking about today?
Today, we want to talk about kind of Rule Zero conversations, our Rule Zero conversations, some of the things that we do in prepping for playing with other people new or people we've already played with at an LGS, at a con, and just kind of what things impact our deck building, impact what decks we might bring, impact the things we want to let people know about our decks and what decks we end up shuffling up and bringing to the table. And don't forget...
We are still running our giveaway for the sealed set booster box of Wilds of Eldraine. So if you happen to be one of the brave few audio-only listeners, FYI, this giveaway is only for our YouTube subscribers. So head on over to our YouTube and subscribe over there. Same kind of content. We release a podcast over there as well. All you got to do to enter is be one of our first 100 subscribers to the YouTube channel and leave a comment on any of the videos during the duration of the contest, and you are immediately entered to win. One entry per subscriber, so you can't multi-comment to get multiple entries this time around. But it's not too bad. Either way, the reason we're running this bad boy is to say thank you. Thank you to all of our early supporters. We really appreciate it. This is a huge project for us. It's a passion project. It's something we absolutely love. We can't wait to bring more people into the community and, just keep bringing joy and a little bit of comfortability into your lives. And of course, eventually, once we grow big enough, we're super excited to have more of a community with y'all. So hopefully we can get some spell table games in, we can play, we can chat on the Discord and brew decks together, and it'll be a grand old time. So thank you for being here at the start, and good luck to you. Don't forget to subscribe and get that entry. So without further ado let's dive into this conversation and start with the basics, right? So we're all kind of familiar with Rule Zero, if you've heard the term before, as being this idea that before the game starts, hence the zero, right? It's kind of like the gemstone caverns or whatever, as only if you have it in hand before the game, you can come out with it and play, or one of those ley lines or whatever. This is the ley line of how to play Commander, basically, right? If you sit down at a table, you already got this in hand. You got to have that Rule Zero conversation about what kind of game experience you guys are looking for. And there's a lot of layers to how to have this conversation. But it's really an important part of Commander, especially Commander, because it is an unsanctioned format in most instances, unless you guys are playing in a league or something of that nature. But most cases, this is casual. You're going to an LGS Commander night that has, at most like some pack per win pricing or something of that nature, but it's still with the anticipation that we're there to have fun and casual. So with something with such a variable intention for your game experience, some conversations probably have to happen before we start to make sure everybody's on the same page. We're all going to have a great time. So with that in mind, one of the easiest ways to kind of start that conversation, probably the most typical, is this idea of power level. But that can be a bit tricky and a bit confusing. So, John, why don't you get us into what that even is? What are we talking about when we're suggesting power level, and kind of what are the details behind the scenes?
Yeah, so power level, basically, use a scale, whether it's, I don't know if it's 0 to 10 or 1 to 10. I'm pretty sure it's 1 to 10. But basically, assigning your deck a number based on how strong it is. And for our audio listeners, strong went in hard air quotes. I struggle a lot, as Dan can confirm heavily, with gauging power levels of a deck or a hand or something. You have to think about, what does power level mean to you? What does it mean to the people you're playing with? And that's a really hard thing to know. I know that somewhere floating around the internet, there's like a semi-official thing that supposedly dictates like, if this, then that, if this, then that, and gives you like, well, then your deck is probably A, blah, blah, blah. But we've also all seen the TikToks and the shorts of the my deck's a 7 conversation. Because 7's a really nice number. It's not too high. It's not too low. You're basically saying my deck's pretty good. But I've played against decks that have been 4s that run tutors. And I've played against decks that function like a 9 that didn't. So I think the power level goes a lot further.
Yeah.
Than what those initial things take into content.
Yeah. That's a really good point. I think that's part of the problem, right? Is that there's this idea that a deck is a power level statically, which I just don't think is often true in Commander, right?
Me
either. Once you hit a certain tier, like a certain echelon, I feel like decks that are kind of more optimized, right? Like I would say like the quote unquote power level 9s and 10s are probably satisfactorily 9s and 10s most of the time.
Oh, yeah.
Generally speaking, those are going to be the ones that are fully optimized and have a lot more consistency to their play style. But otherwise, decks are kind of all across the board sometimes, especially when you get more into that mid range, because it's not like you're just playing bad cards. And when somebody hears, oh, I have a power level 4, I think most of us probably hear that and go, oh, okay, so this is kind of like a somewhat bad deck. So if the bad deck ends up doing anything, you're kind of like, what the heck, bro? Like, you gave it less than a 50%. This is a 4. Like, how is it even functioning? And I think that provides part of the real issue here, right? Is that we are playing the most variable heavy format. This is a format really that was it made for versatility, variability of play, and kind of to be like a puzzle box for players looking for something a little bit more complicated. For the most complicated format made with that in mind, one with intense variability, trying to label a deck a particular echelon of power is very hard, I think, and oftentimes a little bit problematic. So, with that being said, I feel like John, kind of hinted at, a lot of the times that conversation does come down to, what's in the deck. And a lot of times that conversation focuses around things like tutors and fast mana. And I think that those are good cornerstones for determining like some semblance of power, but it's almost more of an information into like the individual's intent when building the deck and what they hope to achieve. So I think another way we can kind of look at like labeling our deck a particular level is oftentimes the objective that we plan to achieve in the deck. Maybe you can tell us like some examples of objectives maybe present in your decks that you would kind of stick across your power level scale there. What are you trying to accomplish usually in something you would pin as like a 7 or a 4 or something of that nature?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I have a weird, I have a weird spread of power levels. I have so many typal decks, and I think that's honestly kind of a really nice way to look at it, because their objectives are all very similar, but they all achieve it very differently. So something like my Joda, the Unifier deck, is legendary typal, is essentially what it is. That deck looks to play the mana dorks that get me to a 5 mana turn 3, and on turn 4, latest turn 5, hit you for 40 damage uncontested. Like, there's no real way around that, especially in a 1v1. Like, you play Joda, and then if I get something with haste or something that makes Joda even stronger than he already is natively, the deck just kind of goes, that's it. That's the whole thing. Something like my bear typal deck looks to play bears. I don't know if you know the term like bear in Magic, but it typically refers to a 2-mana 2/2. So creature type bear runs a lot of 2-mana 2/2s. And if you think about what I just said about Joda and the turn 5 and the mana dorks and all that, the bear deck doesn't do that. They're both fully functional. They're both extremely fun. And they're both typal decks. But they kind of start and end in very different spots.
So I think that those are actually good examples too, like to kind of like a look at the conversation we were just having, right? Is like, I feel like in a lot of ways, they represent like some of these principles, right? So there's the objective, like what you're hoping to achieve with the deck. And then another thing, which we didn't really touch on, which is like the timeline, right? Like almost like, what is the expected expediency of the deck? What turn do you expect to kind of go off on, or what objectively is the turn you're trying to achieve? And then also, again, just generically, like the types of cards that are involved in them. I think that a lot of the times, power level, again, like it comes down to slightly some kind of consistency. Like, I think very obviously there's a discrepancy in power level. That's undeniable.
Oh, yeah.
But again, there's a lot more variability in how hard bears can go versus Joda. I feel like Joda is gonna go hard no matter what because it is tooled to have like these kind of guaranteed points where like 9 times out of 10 you're hitting that turn 1 mana producer, into some kind of 3 CMC drop on your turn 2. Leading you very, very quickly, if not almost immediately, into your commander cast on your turn 3, or at least some other relevant piece, something protection or mana base that's gonna like skyrocket you once you hit your turn 4. And generally speaking, like you said, like after that, Joda goes to face for lethal like very, very quickly, almost in the next turn or two.
Yeah.
Whereas bears, I don't even know if you can really have that conversation, like of consistently where bears goes off. We can have bears, kind of like getting really gassed up and at least having a big board of meaty dudes somewhere probably in that like turn 5 to 7 range maybe. But it can be all over, the map. So I think that again, like that's a perfect way to kind of concrete exactly what we were saying before, right? It's like bears is all over the map. So what is bears? Is it a 4? Is it a 6? I mean, some days it is a 6. Some days it's a 4, right? So I think almost more important than this idea about power level, I think honestly, I would hot take. I would say power level is almost just kind of an antiquated way of talking about this. I think that more like an open-ended dialogue is probably the better way to address where you kind of expect to go with the deck. And if it is one of those things where it might function somewhere variably between a 4 and a 7 or somewhere in the mid-range, that's probably easier said in that diction than trying to conjecture a number, which again I think is something that sometimes becomes problematic especially when we're playing with new individuals, trying to give them a true kind of glimpse at what we're about to bring to the table. So generally speaking, you might also deal with some people who are not super familiar with playing with others, or maybe even a new player who doesn't know how to gauge their power level as accurately. Maybe they haven't just like played around very often, or they just constructed a new deck and they're following some train of excitement, and it may be crazy, it may not. So I feel like a lot of times, like more experienced players, we also have an opportunity to be like somewhat of a guiding hand. And ask questions. Don't be afraid. Like if somebody isn't confident with their power level, instead of taking it and just assuming that person is hustling you or something of that nature, there's no skin in the game here. We're just trying to have fun. You can break the ice a little bit and just question them a little bit about their deck, not in a way that encourages them to reveal information that they're not interested in revealing, but in a way that kind of helps guide the conversation so that you're all having the better game experience. Like a player may not even be familiar with the term stacks, right? And this is another hot ticket item that we're all familiar with. A lot of people don't enjoy playing against a stacks-based deck, but a player might have built their deck and not even know that it constitutes as stacks or what power level to put that at. So a better way sometimes to have that conversation, I think, would be to ask questions. If you say like, about what kind of control pieces does your deck play, or like the general objective of the deck being to control or to go for combat or to go for a more combo based strategy. These are all informative questions that I think can help you kind of build a picture of what the objective power level is of the deck. But I think at the end of the day, the most important thing is to try to surmise, have a friendly conversation about why are they playing Commander? What kind of game experience are they interested in? And maybe even, what is their experience in the past with Magic the Gathering that kind of led them here? Is this the first format they're playing? Or if they're coming from something like Legacy, another Eternal format, like it might also give you a little bit of information into what style of gameplay that they're used to.
Yeah.
I think that pretty much is more or less nowadays the better way to approach Rule Zero. What kind of questions might you ask somebody?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely go. I like the what kind of control pieces do you run, because that's something that I think gives you a really nice array of things, because there is such, especially now, a wide array of styled control.
Yeah.
I've a very important thing that I don't know if I've ever asked this outright, but it's something that I always would like to know is, do you run Wrath of God and Damnation and Supreme Verdict, or do you run one-sided board wipes, the Urza's Ruinous Blast, the Ultimatum, the Mardu Ultimatum, the one that hits all non-artifacts, all non-tokens? That to me,
Ruinous Ultimatum.
Ruinous Ultimatum. Easy. So I think that is like a huge, as far as like board wipes and removal, like that is a really big thing for me, because that tells me, like, am I looking at board wipes that are going to reset the game, or board wipes that are going to end games? Which is like a really big piece.
Or like Cyclonic Rift. Like,
yes, exactly. I was
yeah.
going to like Cyclonic Rift, and then, it used to just be Force of Will, but are you running Force of Will and Pact of Negation and the 3 blue mana pip one that I always forget? They printed one of them Modern Horizon sets, and Fierce Guardianship. Are you running the free counters, or are you running Arcane Denials? Because again, that's another really big difference between what to me feels like huge spots in that deck. Now again, not to judge somebody, you might be running Fierce Guardianship literally for the moment somebody tries to Doomblade your commander, and that's the only reason it's in the deck. I have no idea, but those are really good guiding factors. What are some of the other things you like to ask that aren't those questions, I guess?
Yeah, so it's complicated, right? I think that we hit, like, again, this is another like thing that makes the conversation a little bit problematic. Honestly, this episode, I mean, we'll tie it up at the end with kind of the real important takeaway, at least in terms of like us here at the comfort zone. But I think that, again, all these conversations do end up producing some form of problematic walls, if you will. Like, for instance, another like kind of cornerstone like cards you could ask about, of course, right, are like win cons, because not all win cons are created in equal. Obviously, if somebody tells you Expropriate is a big bomb in their deck, that's a pretty telling card with respect to where they plan to go. Omniscience or something of that nature. But like, obviously there's problems there, right? Because you can't necessarily go, hey, okay, tell me all the counter spells you run, and also don't forget to tell me your win con, and then go into the game with all of that like outside of game information that you already have, and get to enter the game with that preparation in mind. Almost, if a player is playing some form of control, and then you're able to elicit out of them that they have a mana drain and a Force of Will and so on and so forth. Playing around a Force of Will is a very different experience than playing around an Arcane Denial. Literally having that information right off the bat kind of gives you an advantage. So it becomes slightly problematic to really get these big pictures, right? Like, even just generically them making the statement like, oh yes, there is free counters in here or whatever, like, already kind of sets you on a mindset that you may not have had going into it. Which I think, again, this highlights one of the most difficult parts of this conversation, because there's an element of surprise to Magic that gets lost if we force the issue too deeply, and often having that element of surprise is an important part of Magic. There is withheld information. There is cards that you can't see in an opponent's hand. Interactivity and responsiveness are held possibilities that only really retain their power if that remains unknown information. So how to really reconcile with this, I feel like, is one of the biggest I don't even really necessarily want to say problems, although I know I've already labeled it problematic, but challenges for the Commander community. So I think that at the end of the day, one of the bigger takeaways here is really remembering that, like, this is a problematic conversation, and that it probably isn't going to be handled in just one way all the time. I don't really think personally that there is much of a rubric for how to accurately have your Rule Zero conversation. I think that'd be a little bit audacious or auspicious maybe to claim that that can be done. Now, obviously, in this episode, we're trying to give our kind of view, take, and breakdown on the rules of our conversation, the problems that exist, and directions we can take with it. So I know it all often feels like it's one of those situations where like, hey, watch this to get the answer, and then we're like, nope, there is no answer. Good luck, But it's not so much like to be a sad thing. I think that it's a positive thing. Because it's a humanizing thing if we all can appreciate that, right? I feel like a lot of times the thing that creates this tension at the table is the idea that this is something that's more prescriptive, that you can say, yes, mine's a 7, and or a 6 or an 8 or whatever, and that's firm up, and then the whole game you're playing and you're hawkeyeing their deck, and you're just like, if they play one mother flipping card that's just pushing the envelope, man. If I see a power level 8 come out of that power level 6.5, that's it. Table is flipped. I shouldn't have lost this game. I was bamboozled. I just think that, trying to generalize in that nature often creates more issues than it does benefits. And when we're
definitely.
Yeah, when we're playing in a community, the humanizing element, right? Like the conversation is probably more informative. So I think that like having the conversation, acknowledging the difficulty, and going more into detail to which end that you're comfortable, asking questions but not pushing for information people aren't necessarily willing to give, while still trying to be honest about like, oh, this is the gameplay experience I'm looking for. If you ask somebody like, oh, what kind of control pieces do you play, and they're not really wanting to divulge that information, you can even then take that question back and explain why you asked it. You know what I mean? There are ways that we can just communicate better with each other. Like, oh, well, I'm asking it because the game experience I'm looking for in the deck that I'm bringing to the table is probably going to get stomped on by something that's just too latent with like free counter magic or something like that. So I would prefer to know, at least if I'm, if we're talking something like that level of play, so that I can maybe switch my deck and whatever, or maybe just find another play group. That's one thing as well, I think is a challenge, right? Is like, that feeling of awkwardness of like, once we sit down at a table, oh, we can't leave. Like we've committed to the game, but that's also not true. I mean, everybody's time is valuable. And just like the person across the table from you doesn't really want to play with a salty person who feels like they've been just, dragged through the mud during a game. You also don't want to sit for that experience. So it's really in everybody's best interest to politely say, like, I respect that, yada, yada, but that's actually like, my deck isn't at that level, or it's not kind of the game I'm looking for at this moment. So I'm probably going to go check out another group and see if I can't find something that's a little bit more my speed. Good luck, GG, have a fun time, blah, 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 so on and so forth. I mean, what do you think on that? Like, would you say you feel the same?
Yeah. Oh, no, definitely. I think it's a big thing being able to say that I appreciate your input, or that, I appreciate that you appreciated my input, whatever end you're on, and being okay with maybe not playing a game with that person. Now, there are often times, I know, that you may not have a choice. Like if you go to LGS and you're put in a pod, well, there you go. That's it. If you're at a tournament and you're, oh, nope, we're having a commander night here, and it's tournaments and it's pods and blah, 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 you're stuck where you're sitting. So I think the next step in that is, once you're committed to playing that game, whether you found a new table or you were told you couldn't, is kind of what do you do next? Or what do you do with that information, I guess is a better way to put it. Like once you know the kind of game you're looking for and the kind of game that your 3 opponents and your 3 joiners in the community of Magic are looking for, what determinations can you make based on that? And I think that something that I know that we've talked about at length, and that I've taken to heart, and I know you have as well, is I would rather play a deck that sits 1 tier below the average power level than play 1 above. Because the last thing I want to do is bringing a deck to a table that made somebody else have a worse time just because I was hoping to have a better time. That is, I mean, it's a huge thing. I think that, I'm here to play Magic. We're here to be comfortable and to enjoy Magic and to play Magic with each other. I mean, we've repped thousands of games together. I would rather play a good game with you and lose than be like, oh man, look, turn 5, Joda, I beat you. And you're like, yeah, that happens against my,
I think that that's it, right? Like that's the real, like, big takeaway here. At least, for us in the comfort zone, is probably like my biggest recommendation for like how to approach community play and what would be, you know, the best way to approach your first game, especially in the context where these conversations can be difficult, especially if you sit down at a table and like you're not really getting all the information you need, or maybe you feel it like power levels are misrepresented, or a person's not confident and your conversation isn't giving you the information that you feel would bring you to a point where you're confident on what kind of deck they're bringing to the table. In my recommendation, just like John was saying, and I feel I like quoting the Incredibles in this idea. If you guys are familiar with that movie, towards the end, what's his name? Is it Flash or Dash or something?
Dash.
The kid,
it's
the
Dash.
kid with the fast, yeah, Dash, right? They're finally like the parents are finally letting him participate in the like relay race. But you see them in the stands and they're cheering for him and they're saying, like, go for second, like, as if that's like a badge of honor for him because he's withholding like a little bit of his ability to be more participatory in the race with his community. So I feel like it's not to say don't try to win, right? We're talking about
no,
like,
of course not.
Yeah, like obviously we all want to win, and we're talking about like your game one with a new group of people, and your rule zero conversation didn't give you like all the spice that you need to really make like this poignant, perfect decision for your deck. It's just like John said, shoot one tier down. You know what I mean? Go for second. Like imagine that first guy, and then imagine his deck is stronger than he maybe made it out to be. That's okay. Like don't feel like you need to pull out your 10 and just run train with these guys so that at the end of, like John said, turn 5 you can be like, yeah, victory, done, and just like light all their decks on fire and walk out in this blazing explosion like a cool guy, with your collection out slung over your back, like, you know what I mean? Like it is a game, it is competitive, we are trying to win, but when you're sitting down with a new group of people and things aren't confident or firmed up, just put the training wheels on a little bit, you know what I mean? So that you can actually have the gameplay experience that will give you the information you might have been looking for. Odds are if you're in a pod with people, you might be playing more than one game, or at least if it's at an LGS or something of that nature. More than often, I feel like people aren't just going to sit down for one quick and dirty game with these people for the first time ever, and then you're done. The best way to make sure that you do get to that second game, or you do start to establish a relationship and an understanding of these people, is to get to see their decks too. If you come in with some mamma jamma gassed up combo deck that's going to win ASAP Rocky, you don't even get to see the cards that they're playing, so you don't even get a better idea of how accurate their power level assessment was, or how accurately they prescribed or described their deck, and that doesn't really get you any information, nor does it really let a lot of people play the game. So I err on the side of, I would say, caution, in the sense of, I would rather, like John said, I would rather lose, and enjoy the gameplay experience, get more information, learn these people, have more time in the game, more skin in the game, and walk away with the L, than just be completely dominating the board state for the whole game duration, make sure nobody else gets to play, and walk out with that big W, just like big ego boost. So, not that winning is bad, and that's not even what we're saying. Power your deck down ever so slightly so that you can feel confident that you're not about to just run train on these guys. But at the same time, you're going to shoot for victory. So shoot for second. You know what I mean? Don't think about it as like, oh, you want to make that guaranteed win, and don't shoot for last. Like, don't bring your power 2 deck out when they've obviously, made the self predication that their deck is maybe a 7 or something of that nature. Go mid-range, go a little bit toned down, and try to focus on the gameplay experience and learning these other players as humans, so you can make a better informed decision for game 2.
Exactly.
And of course, if you feel like, you get the idea that maybe people represented their deck is a little weaker than it was, now that you have that game experience, I feel like you can feel a little bit more, take the cuffs off, What do you...
It brings to mind when we were at the MagicCon in Philly back in February. That was it feels like an eon ago. It was still this year, but I would love to get to another con ASAP Rocky to say.
Absolutely.
But I remember a game, and we sat down, and I forget exactly which decks we each brought to the first game. But I know that I didn't play Kinnan, and I didn't play Joda, and you didn't play Atla. And one of the other guys at the table, I brought I forget if it was Yarok and Joda were the other two guys, but I'm pretty sure one was Yarok. And he may have made me feel like his deck was not what it was. No fault to him. I actually really liked seeing his deck kind of go off because I also have a Yarok deck, and I was like, wow, that's cool. But it was a little different. But we still had a good game. Yeah. The game after that, we were both then more confident and able to bring stuff with a little more weight to the table. And that was just it felt so much better to do that than to have pulled out the overpowered decks right out the bat, because he was grinning ear to ear. He was like, my deck never does this. This is super cool. Like, and his interactions were flowing really nicely, and all the stuff. It was a well-oiled machine. It was disgusting, and it was beautiful all at the same time. Kind of like a Phyrexian, or something. I don't know. But and that was a way better experience for everybody involved. And walking away from that, I forget if it was 2 or 3 games total we played with those 2 other guys. That was a great session of playing, and that's the goal. Like, I'm playing a game because games are fun, and this game I find very fun. The game I like having the most fun playing the most.
You guys,
very simple.
You heard it first here. Game equals fun. Fun equals fun.
Exactly.
Do it.
That's the thing, right? So I think that's really, really important as a whole.
Yeah. No, actually, I think it's great that you brought that up. Like, because again, way to go, Doug. You hit these examples on the head. No, it's a perfect example because it's true. In that first game, we both picked out something that was like a little bit more toned down because it was hard to assess, like, that original Rule Zero conversation. Especially at the Magic Con, you're playing with all different people, and these people are used to tons of different LGSs and variable gameplay experience. So, we made that decision in the first round to kind of be like, okay, let's go for something that like we know is gonna have a game. You know what I mean? We might get stomped, but like we'll play some interaction pieces, we'll play some cards out. It is what it is. So we'll play that lower power level. We'll get a gauge. Because it was we're looking at Yarok, and we're hearing the description of the deck. It's like being like this value engine that doesn't really go much anywhere. Yarok, value engine, we're like, okay, this thing might be cracked, but let's take it one step down and then, kind of move on from there. And like John said, in that second game, it was really nice. Once we were able to power up a little bit more confidently, it all leveled out. It was really great. We had another play experience there too that was kind of like more like hit the nail on the head kind of thing. Like we were against this like father-son duo. They were really awesome people. Shout out to
they were great. They were great.
Wish I remembered your names.
And it was the first. I think it was the first games we played in the zone that con weekend. So it was like our first time playing at a con in general, like in that capacity.
Yeah, at that level. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, no, and the games with them were really cool. We were all able to be like, our decks are more mid-rangey, blah, 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 blah. And, it ended up being the case. And sometimes your conversations can go that easy. So, don't go into this, like, with nerves. You know what I mean? Like, or at least try to approach it with the understanding that, like, again, we're all here to have fun. And the other person at the other side of the table, that's a human being. You know what I mean? They have feelings. They're here to have fun too. They have their own valid idea of how having fun is done through the guise of this game. If it doesn't match yours, neither of them are less valid. But the idea is to have the conversation to understand what perspective you guys are coming with, and honestly, in life, right? Like having those conversations can just help us understand each other more in general. And that's something really cool about Commander, that it is community driven. It does necessitate a little bit more, learning people, and it's something really cool about the ability to play a card game that enables these really interesting interactive community experiences, and honestly just learning more about people and respecting boundaries and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, I think that, you know, of course, as per always, however you guys handle this is totally okay. There is no one right or wrong answer. And the idea of us having this conversation is more to just open the door to those ideas, of being okay with the no right answer. Now that being said, I'll leave you with one more idea or one more tip. A lot of times I feel like too, sometimes it's worth it to diversify your collection a bit. Now, please, I don't want to. I got a problem, okay? So don't be like Big Papa Dan. Okay, do not idolize my massive collection of decks. It is wrong. It's not healthy. It's a whole lot of fun, so actually go ahead and do it if you want to. But me and John, okay, I don't know the official number anymore. We're in like a heavy brewing phase right now, so last time we calculated it was like 70 or something, but I'm sure like once we're done everything we have right now, we're probably up at like almost 90 decks collectively. So yeah, that's crazy. But okay, take a small page out of Daddy Dan's playbook, and if you don't have a couple decks that span the power scale, if you will, at least to the way that you can think about it, consider making one that is a little bit more mid-range, something you feel good and confident that is not going to run off with the game. All right, something that the best it can do is a little bit of interactive combat pieces, right? Like that's what I do when I want to make sure I have a mid-range deck that's going to be playable at any table. I focus on combat, very traditional style to build a deck. It forces player interaction. When you're going to combat, you are going to have to attack at another player who's going to have to make decisions for blocks, and this gives also like a pretty big hurdle to get the W off of, right? Like you have 3 other players at the table. You're looking at a combined 120 life points that you got to deal. That's a lot of damage, as they say, right? So if you're going for a combat-based build and you build it a little bit more traditionally, like nothing that's going to make your creatures go infinite or something of that nature, you got an agenda. And I'm not saying you can make it deck poorly. I have a lot of decks that are focusing on more traditional combat-based that are very interactive, that are pretty strong, but they take a minute to get there and kill the whole board. They're not going to combo out and instantly get everybody. There's no like full group damage. If you go for that kind of build, that's one way to make sure that you have a more toned down deck. Another way I would recommend getting yourselves a deck that sits more mid-range is maybe introducing a budget. You may not be a player that needs to play with a budget, and that's totally fine. I have some decks that are budget and some that are less budget that are from card pieces I've collected over time, or card pieces I've picked up over time that were mistakes based on that magic piece of plastic in the old Walito, if you know what I'm saying. So at the end of the day, though, if you introduce a little bit of a budget to your build, oftentimes that can also help you just kind of power a deck down a little bit. You're not going to be running like these ridiculous fast mana pieces at that $50 whatever budget. I heard a lot of times now people are even going as far as like making these $20 budget decks. Redundancy and power creep have left it so that you can build a pretty strong deck on a really tight budget, but it will keep you from running those pieces more often than not that are going to really take the deck and push it over the edge. But those would be like some of my recommendations. Do you have any other recommendations for kind of like having decks that can kind of be more diversified and across the board there?
I really like moderately upgraded precons, actually. I don't know what the total number is, but I mean like Perry, the Pulverizer somewhere. I just in general, I've as we buy the precons and we use them, and sometimes we just strip for parts. But I've really enjoyed a lot of my mid-range decks kind of birthing from precons.
Yeah.
The precons are kind of in a nice spot for new players. I think a big part of that is understandability. A lot of the precons are easy to read if you're a new player staring at one of them. So between that aspect and the aspect of this deck did not cost $3 bazillion because I bought it on the shelf at a Target on sale. You kind of know what to expect about how explosive they're going to get. I think it puts a nice ceiling on the decks. And with a couple moderate upgrades, a lot of the decks don't even really need like upgrades in terms of like souping up their power, just like swapping out a couple cards that you already owned that you would run in a deck like that. Something that more fits your style, your flavor, or even just, oh, that deck runs like 10 cards that I have foils for, and I'd rather swap those in because shiny cards are pretty. But things like that, I think, is a really good way to kind of self-moderate that. Because the decks, for the most part, are only going to get so explosive unless you're retooling the deck entirely. And I've had a lot of success being able to go, oh, I'm pulling out this precon. Oh, my brother has that deck, and so I kind of know what it does, and I've seen a lot of the cards in it. And even if I'm not running the exact same thing, it makes the opponents and my play experience a lot more even ground, which I really enjoy. I have no problem playing, especially with the newer precons. They're super fun. So I have no problem running those over something that I custom brewed.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of the precons nowadays, like we kind of hinted at in some of our precon battles, the R&D on them is really going above and beyond. So they work relatively well out of the box, and they are a really good tool for new players. And I also like that you say about like the understandability too. Like sometimes like part of power level can have to deal with the complexity of the deck, like understanding the lines. If you're running a combo deck that has like really complex lines, sometimes it can be harder for the person across the table to even really know what's going on or what to expect. I think we lightly touched on this in our casual meets competitive video where I did Atla, because Atla tends to have like some really complex lines. So that's often one that, even if it's not sitting like all the way up there in power level, although it's obviously relatively optimized, it almost belongs in those games just because it's hyper complex and a little bit hard to predict if you're not used to playing up at that echelon. So that's another interesting point. And if you're trying to like add to your collection in a way, and you don't want to do a precon, but you want to have like more understandability in your game, but you are a player who likes really complex lines and complex interactions, I think a really nice way to achieve that too is, build yourself a deck that is a little bit more toned down with the power of the pieces inside the deck, or maybe where the deck is going, your eventual win cons or something. But I mean, add something very simple like a flash enabler. Like I love flash enablers. I would fanboy over it all the time, but like things like Leyline of Anticipation or Vidalcan Ori, or even like the new like Gandalf from the Lord of the Rings set, the Gandalf the White, I believe.
Yeah, it's just Gandalf the White, yeah.
Yeah, he enables flash on your legends and artifacts, I think. But like enabling flash, especially for your like generic spells, not necessarily like even like for your creatures or your sorceries or whatever, if you enable flash speed is where like a lot of the interactivity comes in a game of Magic. Being able to be responsive on another player's turn keeps you involved. It also keeps the other players on their toes. And enabling flash in a deck that's a little bit more tooled down allows you to be interactive and responsive with pieces that are maybe not that crazy, so it keeps people on their toes, but it doesn't mean you're blowing them out of the water. So you can get a taste of what it's like to play like a more high powered interactive deck that really takes advantage of the stack while still running a build that's a little bit more mid-rangey, so that you can, enable easier rule zero conversations and easier confidence when entering a game. So anyway, I think that about wraps up the convo. So, hopefully you guys were able to glean something of benefit from this, a little bit of at least like an insight into how we generally tend to approach Rule Zero conversations, some of the complexities and problematic issues with those conversations, and ways to, inform your next conversation to make things a little bit more humanistic and, a little bit more relaxed and maybe even comfortable.
Hey.
So, definitely if you guys didn't already, remember to enter for the giveaway if you're interested in free cards and hanging out with the boys. So you got to be one of the first 100 subscribers and leave a comment on any of the YouTube videos during the duration of the contest. Again, if you're an audio only listener, head over to the YouTube, subscribe over there as well. That's where we do our fun gameplay videos weekly. So you definitely don't want to miss out on those. And of course, if you are on the YouTubes or you're headed over that way, most important part of these podcast conversations usually is get down in the comment section and let us know your experience. You know, we're just two guys. You know, this is just our kind of personal biased take and things that we've gleaned over way too many games of Magic and
way too many.
A very long magical life. So if you guys have your own kind of tips and tricks with dealing with the rules of your conversation or the complexity with analyzing, you know, power levels and trying to come to a table with new people and produce a gameplay that experience that's good for everybody involved, let us know. You know, let the community know. Get down in the comment section and tell us what it's all about and what you guys are into. And we are getting very close to having our Patreon and Discord all set up. I know we teased it a couple times. It's kind of complicated to build. Has anybody else out there built a Discord server? And you know, like, there's a lot of moving parts. It's very interesting when you go behind the scenes with some of this stuff. If you do have a Discord server or anything, let us know down below. That'll just be interesting to see what's out there. But so keep on the lookout for that stuff. We'll be announcing that sometime in the nearish future. So definitely let us know. In the meantime, anything that you guys might want to see out of that, because we definitely want it to be a really cool spot for the community. We have some really cool ideas brewing, but we want to get your input too. So that's enough for today. Feel free to follow any of those prompts. I know I gave you guys a lot. But again, we love you. Thank you guys for being here. It's really awesome having the support and being able to produce content for you and get people a little bit more comfortable in this crazy game that we all play. So without further on the docket, we're going to wrap things up and we will talk with you guys in the multiverse.